Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as we welcome Lord Dolar Popat.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to speak today at the Third African Summit. As a British citizen, any opportunity to talk about Africa is of great importance to me. My position as Prime Minister at Envoy to Rwanda and Uganda is, of course, the first reason, but it is also because some of my roots lie in Uganda, as per your introduction. Uganda, my homeland country, and a country where I was born. And many of you know the history of that country. It was a brutal dictator, Idi Amin, that tortured me and kicked me out of that country at the young age of 17, and I came to this country as an asylum seeker. So what an honor and a privilege to serve the mother of all parliaments. It's the value of this great country that has enabled me to do. I have been, as mentioned in the introduction, a Minister for Business and Transport and a member of the Royal Household. I stood down in 2015 to pursue my interest in the Parliament, which is SMEs, trade and investment, Commonwealth, which is our family, and of course, Africa, a continent I was born in. I can tell you one thing. You can take a boy out of Africa, but you can't take Africa out of the boy. So here I am. So this year's conference topic of inter-Africa trade could not be more relevant for me. Far too often, the continent suffers from fears and misleading ideas about the business opportunities in most of the African states. I believe in Africa, and since my childhood, major changes have already taken place. Some economies, including those of Rwanda and Uganda, which I follow closely, are thriving and outnumber most of the Western countries in terms of GDP. In a period of uncertainty for Britain's future following the 2016 referendum, our trade should focus increasingly on its historical partners and thus on Africa. It is time for our foreign policy to prioritize stronger trade and diplomatic links to secure our nation's prosperity and economic future. Africa's potential is enormous. 54 countries cover a landmass that is bigger than China, the continental United States, Western Europe, Japan, and India combined. It has 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, and is second only to Asia in attracting foreign direct investment. 45% of African countries are predicted to experience growth rates of over 5% in the coming years, with its collective GDP expected to increase by $3 trillion in the next decade. It has the largest middle class in the world, now over 400 million people, and by 2050, more than a quarter of the world's population will be African. Africa's greatest asset is that its population is young, in stark contrast to Europe's aging demographic. These changes are also accompanied by positive changes in the business world. For most people in this country, Africa is known with live aid, war, dictatorship, poverty, and handouts. We are ignorant of the giant strides Africa has taken in recent years, embracing free markets, democracy, and trade to help drastically increase life expectancy, improve access to education, and reduce poverty. The job is far from complete, and there are still major challenges to doing business in Africa. But as we assess our potential trade partners for the next few decades, it's important that we see Africa as it is now, rather than how it was perceived in the 70s and 80s. Trade envoys were created some years ago, and 8 of us were given the opportunity to work with emerging economies of the sub-Saharan continent. This was a first step towards increased cooperation and shared prosperity with the African continent. I advocate for groundbreaking shift in the way we look at African economies. We need to adopt a new vision. Too often, investments and potential projects suffer from long-standing fears. Our historical connections with the continent are great opportunities to strengthen mutual trade and share prosperity. The Commonwealth brings together 18 countries in Africa, and 75% of African countries use English as a main business language. My noble friend, Lord Howe, always says in the Parliament that America is our allies, Europe are our neighbors, and Africa, or Commonwealth, is our family. So I think we must make sure that the commonality we have of English language, judiciary, rule of law with these Commonwealth African countries is something we should make it work better. In the forward for Department for International Trade plan for Africa, the African new commissioner states that Africa is a key continent on which to demonstrate Britain is truly a global player. And she goes on to say that the opportunities in Africa are plentiful, similar in scale to those of India and China. Yet the overall story is one of Britain struggling to keep up, of insufficient funding, and a failure to place Africa higher in the potential priorities list. The world's interest in Africa is undoubtedly growing. India and China are now among the major trade partners of the continent. What we have done over these last few decades do not go in the right direction. British Airways, for instance, stopped flying to 2 key African cities. Very soon, after 100 years, Barclays will be selling out in Africa. Yet it is time for the UK to build further bridges to Africa and encourage every possible relationship with those emerging economies. Improving our ties in Africa will tackle the continent's development issue and support its growth. Trade and increased prosperity are, of course, one of the ways we're looking at carrying on human development in Africa. The long-standing vision of humanitarian and aid programs for Africa is not what the continent is waiting for anymore. They will rather prefer trade than aid. The objective of trade and deepened relations with the African continent must go alongside the surge of fast-growing population. As Dr. Joe Bisley just mentioned, Africa is on the course to have 840 million young people by 2050. And in the years to come, the youth will enter the labor market in Africa. Over 50% of Uganda's population is under 18 years of age. Severe climate and environmental issues will also have to be addressed to guarantee a prosperous and sustainable future for the continent. Earlier this year, the devastating impacts of 2 successive cyclones in Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe showed us the persistent vulnerability of some economies and nations towards natural hazards. I strongly believe we will achieve these mounting issues by promoting trade between the United Kingdom and between African states. There are some great opportunities here, as our Dr. Joe Bisley said. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a major accomplishment in that direction. After it was implemented on the 22nd of May, following the final required ratification from Gambia. Nevertheless, conflicts and trade disputes are some of the impediments which are preventing us from reaching that goal. Further integration between African states could deliver great opportunities, and I here recognize the great work that has been done by the East African Community, CADC, and COMESA, and the African Union and other organizations. A diverse economy, innovation, free trade, and a friendly business climate are therefore essential to ensure that Africa will become the world's next dominant continent. My friends, let me just briefly summarize without reading these notes. Africa is the next frontier for trade and investment. We in Britain, our share of trade was 30% not long ago. Today, it is less than 4%. So somewhere we've gone wrong. Our large corporates have left Africa. Londro, Leo Brothers, you name it. I want them back in Africa. As you mentioned, 1.3 billion customers. By 2050, that will double to 2.5 billion. So it's a continent with huge opportunity. We don't see those dictators anymore. Africa is a young democracy, 60, 70 years young. And as I speak to you, we are 800 years old. And we're going through major constitutional crisis. So you have to give a chance for Africa to mature the democracies. And this is a perception, a mindset I'm trying to change of our politicians in the UK, but most important for business community as well. I want to see business people to see Africa as a continent to go and invest. Africa, the perception of dictatorship, poverty, corruption, tribalism is all more or less going. So once we give them a chance, they can do very well. And we need to build bridges as a country. Barclays has been there 100 years and now selling out, leaving Africa. I can't understand how they could do that. As the librarian John Davis, who will probably talk later on, that Africa is in financial services has a huge potential. And we are the largest financial services in the world. John, I want to see every African country having a branch in the United Kingdom. There is so much in common between us, English language, our judiciary, rule of law, all that will help a lot. And I say this to African leaders in terms of ease of doing business. If you look at the index, the World Index Ease of Doing Business, I have worked with President Kagame for some years and President Museveni because I have special interests. I was born in that country. And look at President Kagame's ease of doing business. It's number 2 in Africa, number 36 in the world. If you look at India, was 136, is 101. Look at Rwanda's progress in that. And we're working with the Ugandan government. I was with them just day before yesterday here. The vice president was here, and a large number of ministerial team of Uganda were here to see how we can improve that ease of doing business. But Africa needs to do more to improve that ease of doing business. But more important, we need to do a lot more to be there in Africa. Post-Brexit, I was a Remainer, but now I'm a moderate Brexiteer. You know why? In the last 2.5 years, I've been traveling to Africa, and I see huge potential of trade and investment for our country. They like us, they love us, they want to see more of us. We were hardly there. We became too continental. We saw nothing but Europe. It's about time we change that mindset of our government, of our parliamentarian, and of our business community. Thank you.